Dr. Power, your guests have arrived.
Well, thanks, Josie. Hi, folks. Come on in and welcome to session 3. And there's 2 more chairs on the couch here. Great. Well, let's get underway if we can. This is session 3. Not quite halfway through, but moving along nicely. I'm very pleased the way the discussion sites are going. It's falling in nicely. We have completed assignment week number 1. We try to get that strategist perspective, try to get the new mental models, just some tidbits, some concepts, some notions of just maybe some things that might help you retune, readjust, reset to the mindset of a strategist. There's more there to do, but it was a start. Certainly the Stormtroopers was a good little exercise for those that took it and were successful in completely missing, as I did the first time out, the Stormtroopers walking right straight across. Because you get so focused in your day job on what you're instantly doing that you're missing the Stormtroopers walking around. And that's why I underscore the importance of you taking 20 minutes each day to yourself, closing the door, and just make it your quiet time. Just set it up with the people you work with, that this is your peep, no calls, no interruptions. You just want 20 minutes to yourself to have that cup of coffee and look at the wall. I know that's difficult, but that's what's going to transform you from management to leadership, is acquiring this extra wisdom, this critical thinking, this reflective thought about your business, your organization, and what's going on in the world and how it's going to impact your business. In the second week, we got underway with a little red toolbox and some tools, and I pointed out there's only about 5 or 6 that we might normally go to almost first choice as tools to build whatever we're building. And we talked about those last week, and they're kind of set out nicely in your little black book if you need them. In the little black book, you'll find in the Boston Matrix, one of the axes are reversed, and I apologize for that. The publisher said they'd change it, but when they did the proofreading, they sent me the text but not the figures, and they got in, not making excuses, just I missed it somehow. And they said they'd adjust it, but it hasn't been adjusted yet. And now we're moving off into session 3. Your first assignment you by now have submitted last night. This is theoretically Monday morning. I'll be underway marking those. It was a simple little exercise, just a short little PowerPoint presentation. No APA necessary, no cover pages necessary, just identify who it is. And it's only worth 5 marks, but it was to get a sense of this Internet of Everything and a particular innovative idea that will migrate over into your assignment 2, which is the full Monty. It's 2,000 words and appendixes, cover pages, table of contents. Not really, I'm going to count those in the 2,000 words. And to the extent that 2,000 words, yeah, it means 2,000 words, but I don't want you wasting your time wordsmithing trying to bring it down to 2,000 words. If it's 2,400 words, it's not a big issue with me. It's not so much a word count and filling a box. It's about you, if you have something to say, say it. And for me, I still go back to the substance rather than the form. So please don't waste time trying to get it down to 2,000 words or up to 2,000 words exactly. If you finish saying what you have to say, close it off. I mean, don't give me 5,000 words. I'm not looking for that, but don't spend a lot of time trying to ratchet it down. It's just not worth your time and effort, and your time is too important as we do it. What else do I want to chat? I made a little note here. Part of what we're I think it's emerging through the fog in our discussions. You're getting some sense of the potential threat to workers in Canada. And I sent a chart out, and if you haven't, let me know, but I think you've seen that little graph that's saying where the job's going to be, sort of down and to the left, saying 80% of the jobs that are repetitive. It won't be long for AI and machines pick up on that and are able to do that. And it's the ones out here in the tail, the other 20%, that is where the jobs are going to be. And but as a result of that, we're going to have this great large mass of folks that Montreal textile workers and the truck drivers, 225,000 blue-collar worker truck drivers, many of which are going to have to be retooled. And at age 40, that's hard to do. Some of you are age 40 coming back to university, but you've had a position of being in management for a while, but you've been driving a truck for most of your life. It's going to be hard to get into a program like this to retool. Very difficult. And so what to do about that? And I'm going to suggest 2 concepts, notions for a brief discussion this week. One is the concept of a flat tax, and Trump is coming close to that with his 3 tiers of 15, 25, and 15, 20, and 25% flat tax, and theoretically be able to submit your claim on a postcard that size. I hope he gets there with it, because right now our tax system is so convoluted that pink elephants on a Sunday through your living room qualify you for a deduction. And so if you have accountants, if you have access to law firms, you can find those deductions. And so Buffett and others quite gleefully tell you they pay less tax than their secretary because they get all the supports to take the time and to do this right and make sure they don't step into the mud. But most of us don't have that luxury. And so you spend an awful lot of your time during the year just collecting pieces of paper, a lot of time for a week getting ready to take it down to the accountant. The accountant wastes time doing it. Revenue Canada wastes time checking it. And on it goes. It's just such a waste of productivity. It adds nothing to the GMP of Canada. And I have a saying, I guess the Irish saying, it doesn't produce any potatoes. It'd be far better if we could ratchet this down to a flat tax that basically says the numbers 15%, 18%, Hong Kong, other jurisdictions do this. You pay tax on everything over 18%. Pay tax everything over a certain threshold of, say, $24,000, $30,000. You set the number up to $30,000, no tax whatsoever. Over $30,000, that extra $1, you'll pay 15% or 18% or 15 cents or 18 cents on that dollar as you go forward. That would be nice and simple. No effort required. It would completely close off the underground economy in Canada is reported to be as high as $20 billion, that tax fatigue and driving people to do and pay cash underneath the counter. All that would be dissipated. It would come down quite dramatically, and that's more revenue for the government. So maybe this week we could talk a little bit about flat tax and the need for it. In every American election, as far back as I can remember, somebody, whether it was Forbes was one, I think Cruz in the last election, Trump here, are all proponents of this idea of simplifying the tax code to something like a flat tax, something you and I can fill in and get it completed rather than the forms we have now and interpretation bulletins that we don't know what the tax law really is. So that's a good topic for this week. The other one about these folks that are laying on the street corners and no work, much like the Romans, we have to find something for them to do. And otherwise you'll have like the Arab Spring we talked about last week going on. So the concept of a guaranteed annual income that every man, woman, and child, and the number, just pick a number, but for today's purposes, I'll say $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in the family. That's $4,000 a month. That's for $48,000 a year worth of revenue for a family of four, guaranteed coming in every year for the families. And we'll talk in a minute where all that comes from. But all the other supports disappear. Old age pensions disappear, student loans disappear, social welfare services disappear. What other things? All the government supports, all the offices, all the departments that administrate all this social services and one thing or another all disappear. The folks in the street get their $1,000, and that should buy them a room somewhere and the basic foods. And it's not clawed back like now. A single mom with a child goes out and tries to make a few extra dollars on the side. The government takes a piece of those extra dollars back in as a tax, and it discourages them from trying to get up off the ground. So you say, here's your $1,000. That's enough to at least make sure you got a roof over your shoulders or over your head. Not so much in big cities, but in other cities, got a room over your head and some very basic foods. But now go work. Go take these jobs that they're advertising right now for clerks in McDonald's and shopping malls, etc. At the basic wage of $10, $15 an hour, and do that. Try to better yourselves, and that money you can keep. So now you have $1,000 plus that, and as a result, you're better off. But if we close down all the government departments, I think you'll find if you start adding them all up and the salaries of government employees and the golden handshakes and the high pension plans, I think you'll find there's a great source in there that will serve us a step. But it's worth a discussion. Flat tax, guaranteed annual income for this week. Why don't we look at that and see what happens? Very good, people. That's the administration out of the way for the day. I'll talk about Robinhood at the end of the session. Well, today in the Met Press, we have the Globe is carrying the story, and of course it's been a highlight for most of the week on the trade war that's bubbling. But keep in mind, this is how Trump negotiates back and forth. You demand everything up front, you shatter, you shake, and the negotiations, of course, don't take place till May. So at this point, they're just laying out their positions. There's no sense to panicking at this point until we see what comes out of the negotiations. But the basic argument is, and I think there's some merit to America's case, is that $500 billion or $300 billion, I think it's $500 billion a year, is the differential in the trade. So that money is flowing out of the states and staying in China. And 1 year wouldn't be too bad, but it's year after year after year, and it's hemorrhaging. And so Trump is simply trying to restore the balance of trade, like buy a little more from us so that we don't have such a wide gap between the two positions. And so there's some merit to what he's saying. But keep in mind what's pushing this, of course. Trump is trying to get the NAFTA deal finalized. He doesn't want so many fights on so many fronts. He's got the North Koreans we'll talk about and the NAFTA agreement. He's got it going all over the map. He works hard for an old fart as we go through this thing. But clearly he'd like to get the NAFTA agreement cleared up, and that's something then Canada negotiators should understand. In fact, when you go to Asia, they're good at this. When you step off the plane, they talk about Gulf and they want to build a relationship, etc. And one of the questions they'll weave in, of course, is when are you leaving? When's your plane leaving? And once they know what time you're leaving, then they're going to be good people. They're going to take you out for dinner, do a little golfing, da-da-da-da-da-da. And then just about as you're boarding the plane, it'll be time to negotiate. And now your back's against the wall. You've got to go home and produce something for the boss. And they have wined and dined you and really haven't got down to the business side of the house until the 11th hour, quite deliberately to strengthen their bargaining position. And I think to some extent that's what's going on here. It also is about, too, is some face-saving back and forth between the parties that China has to respond when America fires the first bullet. Initially, the response, I thought, was rather tepid, but it's stiffened as we go through it. And it's interesting what China is asking for now. If you look at the actual commodities, Boeing is the exception, I suppose, out of Seattle, but a lot of it comes from Trump states, the red states, the people who produce pork and beans and things like that. And that's a big hit for farmers. And those are the same farmers that got him elected. So very good strategists. It's go and chess again, that they've thought this thing through. It's just not throw it at the dartboard. But where will incur the most damage to put the pressure on Trump? And so he's going to Trump's base, she is, and he's attacking those folks. And so it stimulates it. So next, let's see what's also in the paper. That's that thing. Canada is going to resettle some African asylum seekers. They come from Sudan and Eritrea, I think, are the two. Israel agreed to take them in, decided against it at the last minute. Canada quietly, Trudeau quietly went in the back door and said, we'll take a couple thousand, send them along. And so it begs the question again on immigration that I think most of us would agree that on a merit basis, if we have jobs to fill in Canada, it makes a lot of sense. We have to attract and retain immigrants. But if they're coming in and going to be a drain on our system, most of our provinces, Ontario, for example, is a basket case. You've got 70 some odd $1 billion worth of debt heading down your way, and the last thing you need is more people draining the scarce resources, medical plans and things like that. So we want to look at the idea, and also I think there should be a discussion. I don't think the directing minds, notwithstanding we give the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister great powers in this country, I think the people of Canada deserve some sort of discussion around to what extent the immigration and what levels the immigration and the threat to our culture if you let too many in too fast. We need that discussion. I don't think we've had it. Gaza shooting going on back and forth. Trump, you recall, a while back when recognizing Israel, said he will hold the funds that America gives Palestine each year just to bring them to the bargaining table, but it looks like it's not working because in Gaza there's strife going on and rocks being thrown and people being killed, and we should look a little closer at that to try to get that sense of terrain. Where are you happy standing on? I mean, Israel from its start point in about 1949 had one strip of land, then it had the 67 war, and then it had the 76 war, and incrementally it has increased in the West Bank right now, which was the traditional home for a lot of Palestinians settled there. They now find themselves being pushed aside with bulldozers and new construction taking place in the West Bank that I don't think it was contemplated in 1949 or in 67 or in 76, and it's taking place. The other thing we have happening over there, which is a bit of a challenge, is that Palestine itself, you have the Gaza Strip down here and the West Bank up here, and Israel down here along the coast, and in between these two pieces, Israel controls. And so the supplies come in by ship, the Mediterranean, into here, into Gaza, but you can't get them up to the West Bank folks without going through the train line. But of course, the Israelis stop everything there and what can go up and when it can go up, etc. And so you've got this, won't call it a country, this loose state that has a very difficult time just sustaining itself at the whims of the Israelis, who can turn the tap off at any moment. And so it certainly needs some settlement, some fair, some equity, some justice going in there and have a look at that to find the right balance. And so we could have a discussion around this week and just try to pick the train I think you're comfortable standing upon. Paris is targets keeping the Arctic ice, and they put out two reports, research people, and both reports are slightly different. There's a 2-degree change in the reports, and a half a degree makes a big change whether the Canada's Northwest Passage in the Arctic will be free of ice or whether it will continue to be impassable for the most part of the year. And it makes a big difference because these bodies of water, Pacific, Atlantic, and the Arctic, are really superhighways. As China has made it in its national interest, it wants to move its goods and services through there to Europe because it cuts the time in half, and the container ships aren't small ones that go through the locks in the Suez, but they're giant, 5 times the size containers. And so great efficiencies can be had if they can push through. They've got the largest icebreaker in the world. The Russians know this. The Russians are only 60 miles from the pole. They've set up military bases. They have 18 icebreakers up there. They have 16 are nuclear. They really are making a statement. And keep in mind, their GMP is not much larger than Canada's. I think we're about 1.5. They're maybe about $2.5 trillion. So although we think of Russia as giant, its GMP is what they have to spend is not that far different from Canada. A little bit more, yes. But are we doing enough in the Arctic? We could look at that as something of interest. Davos, Prime Minister took an entourage over to Davos. Every year the globalists get together, George Soros and some of the heavyweights in the back room, the puppet masters, get together to talk about major issues in the world in the sense and what they want to do. But their agenda, if you look at the Davos conference that they have, the World Economic Forum they have over there, it's very much the sense of a globalist moving the world together into sort of one Brussels sort of entity. And anyway, he took the entourage over there, and for 3 days, wined and dined, and they went through $800,000. And the question becomes, are we getting value for money? Anyway, the opposition party is looking at that. What else is in our little paper here? Hope you're enjoying these. I certainly am enjoying the discussions. They're just fantastic. I'm going through it. Oh, this was interesting. It's happening with great increasing frequency these days. This time in Upper Canada College, somebody called Sir John Colborne, and Chamblay was another one. They want to take the statues down because Colborne, according to Desmond Morton, who is a good military author, I read a number of his books, said Colborne was very much admired as a dependable, sensible commander, highly respected as an officer at his time. Anyone who does this as duty as a soldier ends up offending somebody. And he says he's not the first military officer to be targeted for a name change in Montreal. And Morton goes on to say this is punishment without trial. And so this idea of rewriting history, that we're taking down Cornwallis in Halifax, a statue of Edward Cornwallis, the founder of Halifax in 1749, his statues coming down and put away. The states, of course, were first off the mark, but we're doing the same thing here, trying to rewrite history. And so, do you have any views on that? Should we talk about the challenges, the offensive-ness that some people see the statue and be offended? But certainly, the population of Canada in those times was less than 1 million, and are we all to be held liable for that? So we look at that. Liberals need to stop shaming Canada. This was about, it said the Liberals are calling us deplorables, that I actually find your line of questioning to be offensive, insisting that promoting women was the core Liberal priority. Well, we've had some discussions this week about the gender and equity and one thing or another, and so the other side of the House said this is offensive when you object back and forth, and is Trudeau sort of promoting women in a stronger way? And certainly, we've talked before, half the cabinet is women, and it's balancing the gender in Canada. Moscow accuses the West of outlying of poison, rule of law. We're quick off the mark. All these sanctions and things by the Brits and 20 other nations, led in large part by America, have certainly put the hammer down on Russia. Russia's responding, people being kicked out back and forth, but I've yet to see any evidence. And Russia is saying, if you don't mind, just show me some evidence. And so although the press will say they've actually done it, I think at this stage it's only been accused of doing it. And I think in the sense of fair play, we should just try to get the rest of the story before we come down too hard. But and doesn't get away from us, because this is not a good thing, what we have happening right now. The zoo isolates deadly rabbits, pandemics for rabbits, that in BC, in the Nanaimo-Comox area in Delta, BC, they're called the English rabbits. English rabbits out there. They're dying. A deadly virus affects the European rabbits and on the island here, and they're dying off like mad. So we're losing our rabbit population through this pandemic for rabbits. It doesn't spread to people, but again, it's a message that pandemics and viruses that do spread to people. And what are we doing about it? We haven't had that discussion yet, but it's certainly something we should be aware of. China promotes Ottawa promotes a $4.1 billion over the next decade for provincial infrastructure. And of course, nothing says the Liberals will be around to actually spend it, but nevertheless, they're putting in place $4.1 billion to start putting new infrastructure in. And we should need that, because that's one of Porter's determinants on why nations are competitive. We've talked about advanced factor endowments. And to stay competitive in the world, we need intermodal transportation. We need to improve our highways. We need to get those grain we talked about last week off the prairies that are rotting in the silos. We need to have the proper transportation system in place to get it to the coast. And so a lot to be said for that, and we watch with interest, and to be commended that we do need to spend money on infrastructure smartly. Knowledge versus science. An interesting little observation here that Ottawa introduced legislation to amend the federal government's environmental impact assessment process, and it says it should take into account scientific information, traditional knowledge of the Indigenous people of Canada, and community knowledge. And Quebec government popped up, the bureaucracy, and said, what's understood by traditional knowledge? For which the Indigenous leaders responded, this is reductive, counterproductive, and offensive to establish a hierarchy of knowledge. And so the question becomes, and we do the same in medicine, don't we? Asian medicines we frown upon because it's not the traditional Western medicines. And so are we just a little too ethnocentric in our view of human rights? We've only been around 300 or 400 years here in North America. We talked about Canada was the one who drafted the human rights for the United Nations for Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, and put them in. And so they're really Anglo-Saxon, our human rights and ethnocentric view of the world, but we're laying it on, we're insisting that others follow these traditions. So Indigenous folks have a sense of scientific information, they have a sense of the ebb and flow of nature, and should we say yours ranks second when challenged to the scientific answers. And so we could look at that, to what extent. Are Canada's really tolerant? Another article in here today that certainly colleges in the States have started studies in the sociology, and basically to study white privilege and Christian privilege, and the outcome is to level the playing field. And so they're going to spend some time looking at that and designing ways to claw back and to make white folks and Christian folks feel somewhat concerned about where they are in this particular society of Canada and the States. So we could talk about that. What should be and shouldn't be covered by Medicare is raised. And in Canada, we talk about a universal application for Medicare, but that's not the case. We have 4 tiers of medical services here. For example, Workers' Compensation Board in this province gets to play through and go to the front of the line. Others wait for a year to get back surgery, less than that for knee and hip surgeries. They've speeded up the process a little. But Workers' Compensation goes to the front of the line. They've got separate hospitals in Ottawa for the MPs. Hockey players go to the front of the line. And so we have a pecking order in any event, notwithstanding this idea. We think it's a universal application. And certainly for emergencies and things like that, it's a good system. But I'm starting to question that, not think it's a good system. It's being stressed on. I say, hey, back injuries and taking a year before you can get into the system right now to get discs bolted together. It's you live with the pain. It's not a good system in that regard. And so they're pointing out in here the idea that oncology medications, you take them at home, you pay for them. If you have them in the hospital, they're covered. If you get your drug supplies in Quebec, more are covered than, say, New Brunswick next door. So there's inconsistencies as we go through it. There's a new report as to what should be funded. And so as our healthcare system comes under pressure, we need to look at the expenditures and do better spending with what we have. I mean, do we have to buy hospital toilet paper rather than just toilet paper from Costco? There are savings that could be had. Could we have a Motel 6 just outside the hospital for the ambient sort of folks that still need some observation, but basically just need a room and a bed somewhere that, with a causeway, once a day somebody can slip over with a nurse, much like an assisted living at the end, and bring the cost of the bed space down by putting some more innovation in to bring the cost down. Can we adopt the Internet of Everything for robotics for cleaning and robotics for delivering food, bots of those natures? I suspect we can and we will, but we have to start thinking differently. China is feared successful Trump-Kim visit, the summit, and I've been thinking more about that, and you have to think of what the players want in all this. We talk about the grand chessboard, and people are moving around right now. Japan certainly, I won't say is a pacifist, but it very much, and rightfully so, is living next door to this problem, wants to make sure they have peace and things settle down, and that America gives up something to satisfy Kim in order to get this agreement to bring the temperature level down. Beijing, for the longest while, wanted a crisis, wanted to see this thing come to a boiling pot, that the states would finally turn to Beijing and say, "You got some control, can you quiet the mess down?" And Beijing would say, "Yes, I can do that for you if you do this for me. Get your troops out of South Korea." And I think that was the plan there. And then, of course, we have Trump, who simply wants to get rid of the nuclear weapons back and forth. And it was an interesting move that brought Bolton in, John Bolton, the former UN ambassador. And I think I referred to you in here about the Project for the New American Century. It's in the bonus section. But this was a document put together by a cluster of neocons in America, all the who's who of the folks that are right-wing, that had it in their mind they wanted to go for control at the game of Risk, which include taking out the Middle East. And they said they just needed something like a Pearl Harbor event to make it happen. And sure, a year and a half later, after they wrote this thing, Trump gets elected, and we have this event, and then they're in there not chasing Obama necessarily, Usama necessarily, but they're for some reason, into Iraq, and that's clearly all about oil, not watermelons. So Trump, Bolton, my point is Bolton is very much a neocon. I like him, I admire him, he's a very clear thinker, and to be a good advisor to Trump. I think they're both in the same mindset to some extent. But this is all coming to a head in these negotiations, but it's interesting to watch the different players. And Trump, to his credit, didn't allow those folks. Most people would say, well, come to the table, we'll have sort of 2 or 3 of us sitting around the table to get all our points of view articulated. Quite deliberately, he says, China, you're not coming, and he said, North Korea, you're not coming, Japan, you're not coming. So they're having meetings with him, and they're flying over to, Japan's coming, I think, April the 18th or so, over to have a quiet meeting with Trump to get their wishes expressed to what they want out of this. So keep watching that. It certainly adds to the turbulence. The business section, we have Ontario has got its own little protectionist thing going with New York State. New York State has got this new Buy America law, which says anything over $100,000, you got to buy it in the States, and they're rejecting steel back and forth is a big issue, and so Ontario is coming back with its own side of the house saying, well, we're not going to take in a lot of New York supplies back and forth. And keep in mind that Quebec and Ontario are the prime parts of Canada that do the import-export up and down north and south. We spend a lot of our efforts on this coast exporting to Asia and to Europe, and I think only about 6 or 7% of our trade actually goes to the States. I could be correct on that, but it's a very small number. So anyway, there's a bit of a mini trade war going on between Ontario and New York, and we could watch that to see what's going on. It's all part of uncertainty in the marketplace, and it's going to impact our GMPs. And certainly for Canada, the engine for Canada is Ontario. U.S. markets slide further over trade, and my sense is it's too early to get followed. This is just Trump is a disruptor. It's not warm, comfortable, fuzzy feelings. There's going to be lots of disruption, bumpy roads, and certainly the left, their hair goes on fire talking about it. But the reality is, if you look at the outcomes of what's being accomplished, on balance, I think we're moving ahead, or America is moving ahead, and if it doesn't, it was slated to go down pretty quickly. And so he's, in my mind, resetting it. But it comes at a price, and that's volatility in the marketplace. But it presents opportunities. Certainly Tesla, somebody, I think he even did it himself, didn't Musk do it? Somewhere I read or heard that he, for an April Fool's joke, said they're going bankrupt. And I think he did it. It's just a story I heard, but the point is the stock dropped with Tesla down because they pretty dramatically, but it's up today, $12. It's dead cat bounce. It's coming up nicely and back into harness. These are opportunities to buy and to do things. Environmental assessment rules threatens new energy projects. The Liberal government is putting a new Impact Assessment Act together that's going to restore Canada's trust in the regulatory process. And of course, the other side of the House, the people that lay the pipelines, are saying it's impossible to build oil and gas pipelines in Canada if this legislation comes to pass. And so, and it's interesting too that Trump does a similar thing this week in the States. He has put new environmental standards in for gasoline. Only need 36 miles to a gallon, which is a drop from what was supposed to be in place by 2025, I think it was. And California, again, they're pulling it off, the environmentalists in California, that they wanted carbon tax credits and better things done with the auto industry. And so it's happening in the States and in Canada, environmental standards. Lowering in America, stiffening in Canada. Facebook, Zuckerberg, over the next few years, he's going to solve the issue of social media and security and one thing or another. There's a little article in the paper today. But I think a good benchmark would be look at the banks and look at our healthcare system. Somehow they seem to be getting close to having it right on security and privacy of our information. That's a good place for them to look. Certainly, the message from all this, and Zuckerberg faced it, of course, is you can build a brand up, your personal brand, your company brand up for 25 years longer, getting it in place. In the span of minutes, you can blow it. And once blown, it's very hard to recover. It was one of your colleagues about 15 years ago, was a bank manager for a credit union manager, said something that resonated with me. He said, at the end of the day, all you got to sell is your brand, whether it be a company or an individual. That's what you are, is your brand. And Zuckerberg's trying to recover his brand, having blown it. And you can see the difficulties, the challenges he's facing, trying to get that digital trust back in his organization, which is just not there. Without trust, it's not going to work. Hudson Bay is... shares dropped because there was some security breach, data security, an ongoing challenge for all of us. Apple's moving to develop in-house its own chips starting in 2020, and up to this point, Intel has very much been the flavor of the day, and for many of these people, their particular chip on silicon. But Moore's law is fast running out of runway, and the silicon chips are running out of runway, and new alternatives are coming in. And as a result, there's only the quick and the dead I keep mentioning. And so if they can't shift from silicon quickly to some of these new gallium and those things we've talked about in this class, Intel may not be around long. It's under threat right now. So run scared, be paranoid. Your competitor is a new startup right behind you, breathing hard. U.S. Time Warner, AT&T, threat get together. The opposition says that Turner has been threatening to cut off cable companies to win concessions during contract negotiations, so it's unfair pressure against the Antitrust Act. But there's also a second subliminal thing here, of course, is that Time Warner is very much CNN, and CNN and Trump are like oil and water, and so you can't say it's Trump because he's 3 steps removed, but certainly this deal is falling apart, and for obvious reasons. China has got tries to get big tech to come back home, and to do that, Alibaba Group and others who have gone over the New York Stock Exchange, etc., are being encouraged to come back to the Chinese new exchange getting up, and they've been approved now, state councils, and a trial program to allow them to list themselves on the Chinese exchange, and that sort of brings it back. But if you zoom back out for a minute, this again is all about the vehicle currency and economic dominance in the world, that the financial capitals of the world, currently New York comes to mind, and London comes to mind, and with the Brexit shifting more maybe to Frankfurt a little bit comes to mind. China wants in on that. Toronto Stock Exchange may almost be irrelevant right now, that Yes, we have one, but most companies will list as fast as they can on the New York Exchange because of the prestige and the size and the ability to raise funds. And so China very much wants to get in the game, and that's what we see happening here is this financial war. Talk a bit about that this week. It's interesting. New technology boost. We talked a bit about this in the class. The Congo's got all this new technology requires new earths, new rare earths, new metals, things like nickel and cobalt and things of that nature. And I didn't know this till somebody raised it in the class. But the Congo has 48% of the current global economic supply of cobalt that's so necessary for batteries, and nickel, etc., for batteries. And so there's a shift, and people are struggling right now to get a supply chain lined up on this. And right now, China is winning, lining it all up and tying it down under contract. Amazon stock drops after Trump's rant, and he attacks the post office as giving a sweetheart deal to Amazon. Amazon currently pays $2 for a package to have it delivered by the post office in the States. I pay $1.89. I just mailed 4 pieces of paper in a large 8.5 by 11 paper. It cost me $1.89 to mail that in Canada. $1.89 for 4 pieces of paper in the regular mail, and they'll deliver a post office box in the States for Amazon for $2. And Trump is saying, if you don't mind, just carry a little bit more of the weight. Tesla shares, a good lesson there. It's on the way back up. You have to admire Musk. Musk is very much this futurist we talk about. He's out in front. But it's a lesson we can learn as strategists here, the importance of not outrunning your supply chain. And that's what he's doing. He's just pushing in all directions, from rocket ships to putting a Tesla 3 up and as a satellite so we can marketing gimmick. He's taking money from people for the Tesla 3 that are behind productions and promised delivery dates not being met. And so the idea is the genius, whatever, but he's chewing up money. He's running out of a supply chain, and he needs one of you folks with an MBA behind him to just sweep behind and clean up and keep the thing on track. He needs a supply chain. He's running out of it, which is a dangerous thing. I think we're just about the end of the paper. Oh, bunnies in Beacon Hill. Yeah, I talked about that, didn't I? The bunnies, yeah. Beekeepers. That's an important thing, beekeepers. The Fraser Valley fields in British Columbia are festooned with cranberries and festooned with blueberries, lots of blueberries, and it's just wall-to-wall blueberries. And as a result of that, nothing else, clover, other alternatives, nothing grows, just blueberries. And it's a great business. They make a lot of money at it. And every year they bring in bees from Alberta and just bring them in the back of a truck, the hive, set them out around the place. They charge the fee. The bee does the work, pollinates everything nicely, and then they take up the bees, the hive, take them back to Alberta. But they're finding the bees they take back are weakened, not healthy, because there's no other. They're just eating, they refer here like salsa. It's a buffet, and all it is salsa, and that's all they have to eat is the blueberry nectar. And it's weakening them, and so as a result, they say, we're not bringing the bees back anymore. And the result is that the BC Honey Producers Association are talking in terms of millions of dollars in lost production if they don't get bees. And I noticed from my yard last year and this year, I've got fruit trees and other things, and I wasn't a heavy load of fruit in production because this weather, cold, dank, the bees aren't there. I bought some mason bees and put them up, and they helped. But bees are important to the world, to the food production. So, and they're being killed by Roundup, etc., etc. It's quite a thing that we should take a few minutes and look at as strategists, that we support the idea of bees. Prairie winter extend through April. Climatologist in Alberta. All you folks out there in Alberta, as I used to say, I pity you or something. But it's the coldest since 1970, and the forecast for the next month it's going to remain very, very cold. And again, that impacts on your growing season. And I would think the amount of wheat you'll produce this year. And the final little story was just overeducated and underemployed, is that this idea of we're sending all our kids off thinking that the university is the way forward. And it isn't, in the light I sent out to you, and I talked about earlier in the thing, this little slide about where the jobs will be. And that's not in medieval history, it's not Bachelor of Arts, etc., etc. You've got to get over in that tail of that little slide and encourage your children to be out there and yourself retool to be out there, because that's where the jobs will be, and it won't be anywhere else. Well, that's what I wanted to talk about, I think, for today. I hope you enjoyed this session. The other aspect is I've opened up the Robinhood, my suggested answers. These are just little practice cases, Robinhood and Goes Global, etc. They're just for you to have a little practice, talk to your neighbors, practice some tools. I don't even look in on the sites unless you want me for some reason, but it's for you to practice to get ready for your individual assignment, your case assignment, to be ready to do it. But I'll give you my suggested answers, and don't open it, even though I put them available to you on the Friday of the week. Only when you're ready, open them if you have to work through the weekend, so you have a chance to think about it yourself for a few minutes before you see what I think. And my answers aren't necessarily correct. They're just one kick of the cat of what you might have considered. Anyway, folks, that's it for today. I hope you're enjoying these as much as I am. Have a great thing. Unit 3 next week. Bye-bye now.